Let me get this up and running. So I'm Mike Leahy, and I work here in Missouri for the Missouri Department of Conservation as an ecologist with the department. I work on Missouri's state natural areas and also with other agencies such as the Mark Twain National Forest here in Missouri. Back in between 2001 and 2006, I worked in Roanoke, Virginia as a natural areas preserve steward for the Virginia Division of Natural Heritage with DCR. So I'm a little bit familiar with Virginia's flora, but I'm certainly no expert. So today we're going to take a quick tour of the natural communities in Missouri with special emphasis on prairies and our other native grasslands and talk about some of the interesting areas here and then a few plant species that we share in common between Virginia and Missouri. So first of all, our native biological diversity here in Missouri is not quite as robust as what you have in Virginia, since we don't have coasts and we don't have true mountains, but we have some pretty interesting statistics. We have over 2,000 native vascular plant species, over 400 native bee species that we've documented so far, 120 different native butterfly and skipper species, and at least 60 native reptiles. And just like in Virginia, we have a natural community classification that helps conservation biologists like myself organize all this biological diversity into a little bit more easy to understand ecological units that we then are able to conserve and classify. So we classify our different natural communities just as you do in Virginia based on regional climate patterns, the geology of the area, the different soil types, and the lay of the landforms and topography. We also look at vegetation structure, whether it be a forest, a shrub-dominated community, or a grass-dominated community. Now, what really separates our natural communities from just average habitat in the state of Missouri, as well as in Virginia, are the difference between habitat generalists and specialists. So in Missouri, we have, in many urban areas, you can find, common ragweed, white-tailed deer, and Canada goose just about everywhere. But in our high quality natural communities, we find these habitat specialists such as downy gentian, the regal fritillary butterfly, and the pale purple coneflower, the northern crawfish frog, and the rattlesnake borer moth. And in our natural communities, the soils are quite different. These are soils that have not been plowed or altered. And so if you look on this graph, and you'll see Tucker Prairie shown here on the left is a unplowed remnant tallgrass prairie, and it has essentially 4 times the amount of microbial diversity and biomass as the plowed soil, and even double the amount of microbial diversity as a planted prairie. So these remnant communities are very different than altered plowed communities in our state. But they're not static. They're influenced by different ecological processes. So this includes fire in many cases, flooding, soil saturation, drought, windstorm damage, and insect and mammal herbivory. We have 4 very broad ecological regions in Missouri. We have some of the oldest rocks in the mid-continent US. This is the Ozark Highland region here. The glaciated plains. Missouri was glaciated about 500,000 years ago. The Osage Plains, which was unglaciated, and then this is part of our Mississippi Delta. We have the largest 2 river systems in the country come together here in Missouri and St. Louis, where you have the Missouri River shown here, and then the Mississippi River. The north part of our state was historically mainly tallgrass prairie, and today is dominated by row crop agriculture because of those rich prairie soils. The other main prairie region of the state named after the Osage Indian Nation, are the Osage Plains, which continue into Kansas. This is a prairie region that wasn't glaciated 500,000 years ago, but was historically mainly prairie. The Ozarks are the most ancient landform we have, which includes really ancient mountains of 1.5 billion years old, volcanic mountains. But we didn't have the same, these are different than the Appalachian Mountains. They weren't folded and faulted. They're more like a layer cake. And then we have the Mississippi lowlands, or our delta, down in the southeast portion of the state. Now, Missouri is a bit different than Virginia. We're here at the edge of the Great Plains. So we're kind of in a transition zone between the grasslands of the west and the forests of the east. So we have a lot of mixing going on in our state. This map is a little bit busy, but where that arrow is shows areas of historic prairie with areas of historic forest. We had a lot of areas where forests mixed in with prairie openings. So based on geology, landform, soils, and vegetation, we have some major natural community types. So we have forests, which are, of course, going to be very familiar with people in Virginia. We have woodlands, which are intermediate between savannas and forests, and they're influenced historically by fire. These are usually on drier sites, and these include tree species such as shortleaf pine, post oak, bur oak, some of the dry site oak species. We also have some savanna communities where you have tallgrass prairies mixing with scattered bur oaks and white oaks. We have true prairie, which is less than 10% tree cover. Glades, which are rocky outcrop openings, which occur in Virginia as well. They're also known as barrens. Cliffs, of course, and talus communities, and a variety of different wetland types. Of course, we don't have the marine estuarian wetland types that you have in Virginia. So we'll focus on prairies. And prairies, of course, are dominated by native grasses and wildflowers. In Missouri, historically, there were 15 million acres of prairie, about a third of the state. Today, these are very rare natural communities because they were so rich for agriculture. So most of the corn and soybeans in Missouri are on former tallgrass prairie lands. But they're more than just grass. They have lots of different native wildflowers and also native insects that we'll discuss. Savannas are another major community type related to prairies, where it's in that transitional zone between prairies and forest, where you have scattered oak trees or pine trees over mainly a prairie vegetation. And then woodlands are areas that have a little bit more tree cover, but still in the understory, still have a lot of the native grasses that you find on prairies. Glades are these openings in the Ozark region of our state that have many unique species endemic to the glade communities, but also a number of prairie species as well. We also have some wetland types, such as calcareous fens and marshes, that sometimes merge into our prairie communities. So the term prairie is a French word for meadow, and it was used by early explorers such as Joliet and Marquette, who were French explorers from France, came down through Canada in 1673, traveled up and down the Mississippi River, and described for the first time in the Midwest the large prairies that they saw in Illinois and in Missouri. Prairies, of course, are dominated by grasses, and our grasses in Missouri are typically tall grass prairies. So these are areas that get more rainfall. Now, as you head west into Kansas, eastern Kansas is still tall grass prairie, but once you get into mid-Kansas, you get into the mixed or middle grass prairie, and by the time you get to western Kansas, eastern Colorado, you're in that belt of short grass prairie where the grasses are fairly short and rainfall is limited. So our grasses are tall grass prairies, meaning they can get to be head high at maturity, later in the growing season, and these include things like big blue stem and switchgrass. But we also have some midgrass species such as side oats, grama, and little blue stem. And all of these grasses are present in the flora of Virginia. One that isn't present in the flora of Virginia that we have a few examples of are the shortgrass species, and these are in far northwestern Missouri on some dry prairies, and these include the Great Plains species such as blue grama, Bouteloua gracilis. So here are some of the species that we have dominating our prairies, which include species that you do get in Virginia, such as big blue stem, Andropogon gerardii, little blue stem, Schizachyrium scoparium, prairie dropseed, Sporobolus heterolepis, Indian grass, Soricastrum nutans, and switchgrass or Panicum virgata. And these are all what we call C4 grasses. They use the C4 photosynthetic pathway. And they tend to be more drought tolerant than cool season grasses. They use the C3 photosynthetic pathway. But we do have some cool season grasses as well in our flora. This includes things such as June grass. We also have a number of different sedge species, over 100 different carex species in Missouri. And rush species also are found in our prairies. And then, of course, we have a number of different wildflowers. So this beautiful wildflower, shooting star, Primula media, is typical on our prairies in April and May. This species also occurs in some grasslands in Virginia, as well as some barrens. Lead plant is another species that is actually woody, but is a lower shrub. Compass plant, Silphium laciniatum, and sky blue aster, which is now Symphyotrichum uolentangiense, which is a mouthful to say. And a number of these different wildflower species have a variety of different pollinators that utilize them. And that includes the blue sage bee shown here that depends on blue sage or Salvia azurea, which is one of our prairie species that does not occur in Virginia. The swamp milkweed leaf beetle feeds on swamp milkweed Asclepias incarnata, which occurs on our wet prairies. And we also have a number of different interesting ant species, including the prairie mound ant, which forms these very large, almost a meter high ant mounds in some of our glaciated prairies in the north. And so in Missouri, the glaciers that did occur and actually created glacial soil, the glacial till, these occurred fairly old, 500,000 years ago. Now, the most recent glaciation, the one that was 12,000 years ago that covered the Lake States and the Northeast, north of Virginia, that occurred about 12,000 years ago, and that did not make it down into Missouri. This map shows the historical extent of tallgrass prairie in about 1800 in the eastern US. This line here is a somewhat artificial line where they drew a kind of a sharp boundary on the boundary between the tallgrass prairie in brown and the mixed grass prairie, which is not shown on the map, but is to the west. Now you'll see that Missouri was about a third tallgrass prairie. Iowa was almost dominated completely by tallgrass prairie, much of Illinois, even down into the coastal plain of Texas. And there were isolated prairies in Arkansas, Ohio, Indiana, and Piedmont prairies, which don't show up on this map, but they did occur in Virginia and the Carolinas. There were also native grassland communities in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, based on historical descriptions as well. The reason we have such a good set of information here in the Midwest is that we were settled, of course, much later than Virginia, and we used the General Land Office survey methods, which was originally developed by Thomas Jefferson and applied to states in Ohio going westward. And so this method of subdivision of land subdivided the land into a mile by mile square grid. So if you look at surveys west of Ohio, we have township, range, and section, whereas in Virginia and some of the earlier states, you have the old meets and bounds surveys. Well, the General Land Office survey, as the Native American cultures were moved farther west, American Land Survey folks essentially walked a mile grid across these Midwestern states, and they actually recorded when they entered and left prairie in 1800. So we have a fairly accurate timestamp of prairie in the Midwest. Now, our prairies have a fairly old history in Missouri and the Midwest. They started many years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, in the rain shadow of the Rockies. But really, our tallgrass prairies in Missouri did not form until about 8,000 years ago. So 12,000 years ago, the climate in Missouri was much like Canada today. It was influenced by glaciation. But about 8,000 to 6,000 years ago, we had a glacial period, or a geologic period known as a hypsothermal. And our climate in Missouri, all the way to Ohio, became drier and hotter. And at this time, the interaction between that hotter, drier climate and the influence of native peoples using fire, as shown here, pushed the tallgrass prairie eastward. And at the same time, bison, which were originally a western species, moved all the way east into Virginia. Starting about 6,000 or 5,000 years ago, the climate in the Midwest became wetter and cooler. And it was the combination of burning for a variety of different cultural reasons by Native American cultures, such as the Osage and others, as well as occasional lightning fires that maintained the tallgrass prairie. Because in our current climate situation for the last 5,000 years at least, we get enough rainfall that we grow trees throughout the state and not grass. Now, it's not until you get to about central Kansas that the climate gets dry enough where, in the absence of any other disturbance, grass dominates over trees on the uplands. Now, our tallgrass prairies created the breadbasket of America because the deep roots in the soil, shown here on some of these prairie species, created extremely organic, carbon-rich soil, which was ideal for agriculture. But used in native plant landscaping, these are also great species to use to trap carbon and to develop new organic soil on prairie plantings. This map shows the historical extent of prairie in kind of light orange. And then the remnant prairies are, these tiny specks, primarily in the southwest part of the state. Now, in Missouri, we have 12 separate natural community types that represent prairie, and we're not going to go into all 12 of these, but they differ by soil moisture regimes and the type of soil. So this soil here that shows deep soil with very few rocks is a mesoglus glacial till prairie soil, whereas this very rocky, cherty soil here is what we consider a dry mesic chert prairie soil. We also subdivide our prairie types by soil moisture, ranging from very dry to wet. And the biggest difference in our prairies are between the bottomland prairies and floodplains, such as this one, dominated by the freshwater cordgrass, which is Spartina pectinata, and our upland prairies. This diagram kind of shows the different prairie communities as you go from the drier sites on the upland hills to the wetter bottomland prairies in the floodplains. And these are just the different prairie natural communities along that soil profile. Now we'll cover these prairie communities. So this illustration shows the different regions of Missouri where these different prairie community types occur. So this is a dry mesic sandstone shale prairie. It is the dominant prairie type left in Missouri because it has sandstone shale bedrock close to the surface. And so what that meant is that it was not very easy to plow. And so it was not used for conversion to row crop agriculture, but rather was used for hay production. And so that saved a lot of these prairies. I mean, some of our largest prairies, such as Golden Prairie, are on sandstone shale soils. Our largest remnant prairie is at Prairie State Park, and it's about 5,000 acres in size. Most prairies are not that large. One of the neat things about these tall grass prairies is that they're extremely diverse in native plant species. So within a 40-acre remnant tall grass prairie, you can have over 200 native plant species on just 40 acres, which is extremely high. And we have the diversity within a prairie in terms of native plants is pretty incredible. We have the current record right now for the number of native plant species within a 1/4 meter square, which is about the size of probably the seats that we're all sitting on, is about a 1/4 meter square. Within that 1/4 meter square, they found 2 years ago during a botanical survey, 30 different native plant species squished into an area that's, only this big. So they are extremely diverse. And some of that diversity includes things like the pale purple coneflower, which in Virginia, you have a similar related species, the smooth coneflower. Again, lead plant, rosinweed. We have Liatris pycnostachya, the prairie blazing star. Cream wild indigo. We also have the blue wild indigo, which occurs in Virginia, the Baptisia australis. And then a whole number of different asters and goldenrods, including this sky blue aster. Other species include the southern prairie aster, the grass pink orchid, and then a number of different insect and invertebrate species, such as the prairie mole cricket, which is restricted just to tall grass prairies. The grass pink orchid is a species of conservation concern. It's a Calopogon, Calopogon oklahomensis. This is the Physostegia angustifolia. It's narrow-leaved false dragon head, and it is the host plant for one particular leaf-feeding beetle, which only feeds on this particular obedient plant or narrow-leaved false dragonhead species. Our prairies also are home to a number of reptiles and amphibians, including the plains box turtle, the southern prairie skink, and the bull snake. We have dry mesic chert prairies, which are fairly similar to the sandstone prairies. They're fairly acidic and, again, fairly shallow soiled. Some of the species that are characteristic of these chert prairies include the royal catchfly, Silene regia, as well as the fringed poppy mallow, Celeroa digitata, and prairie dropseed. And all of these species are really nice to use in our native landscaping efforts here in native plant gardens in the state. We have hardpan or claypan prairies as well, which have a seasonally perched water table so that in the late winter, spring, the soils are fairly saturated, but then usually by the summertime, those soils are completely very dry and droughty. Tall blazing star or Liatris pycnostachya dominates these areas, as well as these white globes here are the fruiting structures of rattlesnake master, Eryngium yuccifolium, which is a listed species in Virginia. And it's interesting, the oldest known shoes west of the Mississippi River are made out of the fibers of rattlesnake master. They were Native American sandals that were discovered in a dry cave in central Missouri that were then carbon dated at, I believe it's 8,000 years old. And they were able to determine that the fibers were made from rattlesnake master. And if you're familiar with rattlesnake master, it has those yucca-like leaves, and the name is apt, Eryngium yuccifolium. So they were able to make cordage from those. We have prairies on limestone and dolomite soils, and these tend to be calcareous. These are a little bit more rare because they tended to be more easily converted to agriculture. So they have a mix of species, including a number of calciphile species such as prairie dock on them. There's prairie dock shown here. They also have prairie turnip, which is another calciphile species, Pediomelum esculentum, and prairie turnip does have a very starch-rich, large tuber fruit that was used by Native Americans as a food source. In North Missouri, we have dry mesic, less glacial till prairies. Now, these are fairly uncommon because these areas were very rich soils for row crop production, but our largest one, Pawnee Prairie Natural Area, is several hundred acres in North Missouri and is kind of one of our jewels in the natural area system. It includes things such as prairie lily, which is Lilium philadelphicum, and prairie cinquefoil, Drymocalis arguta. We have very few of these left. These are mesic, less glacial till prairies. So these are our deep soil prairies. These are the areas that are the most productive for agriculture. So they were converted fairly quickly in the state, but we do have scattered about some smaller areas such as Helton Prairie Natural Area, which is 30 acres in size. It's been expanded by planting around it to provide a buffer, but the original unplowed remnant is 30 acres, and it supports the western prairie fringed orchid, Platanthera praeclara. We also have a few mesic prairies that are very small. They're only about 10 acres in size that support populations of the eastern prairie fringed orchid, which is Platanthera leucophea, which apparently there are historic records of that orchid in Virginia. At the far northwestern part of Missouri, we have these dry, lush hill prairies. These are in really steep bluffs above the Missouri River floodplain. They face due west, and lush soil is a silt soil, a very fine soil that it's a German name. And what happened is after the glaciers, this lush soil, these very fine silt and sand particles were blown from the floodplains onto the hills and form really deep, 10, 20 feet of this very dry, lush soil. These areas support actually shortgrass prairie species, things like hairy grama, dotted blazing star Lytris punctata, and nine-anther dahlia, which is Dahlia anarida. And these species are more typical 100 miles to the west in central Kansas and Nebraska than they are here. So it's kind of a unique community that's an outlier. Within many of our prairies, we have swales, which are wetter areas that support species such as this one here. This is bunchflower or Melanthium virginicum, which is in the lily family and is a fairly poisonous plant, somewhat similar to Zygodinus, which is a genus I think that occurs in Virginia. In some of the floodplains, we do have some areas of bottomland prairie that are dominated by cordgrass, Spartina pectinata, which is the freshwater cordgrass, which also is known from Virginia. And like so many of these prairie plant species, there are oftentimes unique insects that either pollinate them or feed on them. In this case, there's a plant species of plant hopper that feeds specifically on cordgrass on our bottomland prairies. Here's another picture of a bottomland prairie at Pershing State Park in the fall. And again, you see lots of different things in the aster family. Other bottomland species include Sullivan's milkweed, swamp milkweed, sawtooth sunflower, and then again, there are a number of snakes and amphibians that utilize these sites. In far southeastern Missouri, the climate is much different than northwest Missouri. So in northwest Missouri, we get less than 40 inches of rain a year. It's fairly dry. It's more similar in climate to Nebraska. It's very cold, but in southeast Missouri, we get over 50 inches of rain. This is a flat landscape that was once a vast wetland created by the Mississippi River. And down in southeast Missouri, we can actually grow cotton and rice, which is very different from Missouri. Most of our crops are more typical Midwestern species. But in this region, on sand terraces left from floods, ancient floods of the Mississippi River, we get prairies that are developed on sand. And they have some interesting species that are uncommon in our state, such as dotted bee balm or Monarda punctata, and joint weed or Polygonella americana. And it's host to the dusty hognose snake, which prefers these sandy soils. We also get prickly pear. The species that we get is Apuntia humidifusa. In addition to prairies, we have these glades or barren communities in the Ozarks. So these are rock outcrops on south and west facing slopes that are hot and dry. And they often have a variety of prairie species as well as glade endemic species. So the yellow flowers here is landsleaf coreopsis, which occurs both on these glades or rock outcrop communities, as well as in the tall grass prairies. There are some species, though, that are endemic to the glades and don't occur on the prairies. And this includes the glade coneflower, which is Echinacea simulata. We also have a yellow coneflower, Echinacea paradoxa, which occurs just on glades. And Missouri evening primrose, shown here, which is Enothera macrocarpa. However, we have a great density of glades in our state. And so in addition to prairie restoration, we are working on restoring a number of these glade communities in the Ozarks. The glades range on substrate from limestone to dolomite. This is that yellow coneflower shown here, Echinacea paradoxa. They also occur on igneous or ancient volcanic rocks, sandstones, and chert. And these are those glade endemic species. So that includes the glade coneflower again, the Liatris mucronata, Scutellaria bushii, and then some of the animals include the collared lizard and the lichen grasshopper. Some of these glade communities can be quite large, over 100 acres, and appear almost prairie-like in their size, like this one shown here on the Mark Twain National Forest. In Missouri, we have an interagency natural areas program with all these different partners. The logo is the Jack in the Pulpit, and the goal of the program is to conserve statewide all of the different ecological or natural communities in the state, including our tallgrass prairies. Another tallgrass prairie species that we have in the state that's a federally listed species is Mead's milkweed, which is Asclepias meadii. And on our natural areas, 38% of all our known rare declining species, 38% of them occur on natural areas, including 19 federally listed and 34 state endangered species, such as the Mead's milkweed. In Missouri, besides the Conservation Department, we have a very fantastic organization known as Missouri Prairie Foundation. You can look them up just by Googling Missouri Prairie Foundation. And they have been very instrumental in promoting prairie conservation in the state of Missouri. If you ever visit Missouri, if you just Google Missouri natural areas, we have an online directory to our natural area system and places you can visit. Of course, our prairies require active ecological management. So that includes prescribed burning, spot treatment of invasive exotic species such as Sericea lespedeza, which is our most problematic grassland species. And with that, I'll see if there are any questions. I think there might have been something showing up in the chat. Yeah, the first question, how much of the original prairie is still undisturbed? We have about 50,000 acres left of prairie in Missouri, and about half of that is on conservation-owned lands, and about half of that is still privately owned. And we are participating in the Southeastern Grasslands Initiative, and we've been working quite a bit with folks in Tennessee and Arkansas and sharing information on our native grasslands. And then in terms of regal fritillaries, there are a number of different places to see those during their main flight period, which is typically mid-June to mid-July. Paintbrush Prairie Natural Area is a good place to see regal fritillary butterflies. Taborville Prairie, we have a number of different prairies, but Paintbrush and Taborville prairies are very good places. Golden Prairie, there's a number of different places where during that 30-day window you can see the regals. Any other questions? Hopefully that came through okay. I sure enjoyed working in Virginia when I was there and learning about the flora and fauna in Virginia. And it's kind of neat to see the different crossovers and species between the two states, even though we're separated by quite a distance. Brenda, I think
we need to say thank you.
Let me know.
Yes, I wanted to say thank you. And this is Sally Anderson. I'm not in the New River chapter. I'm in northwestern Virginia. But it really brought back our trips to the Kansas prairies. And if we'd known there were some closer in Missouri, maybe we'd have gone there.
Well,
and I also wanted to thank you about
if anybody else, if anybody's ever planning a trip, you know, this way, just let me know and I can let you know of places to visit.
That'd be great. I'm looking forward to the day we can do that again.
Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this. It was very interesting. It's been recorded and it will be going on to our YouTube channel at some point in time. I'm not exactly certain when, but for people that want to go over it again or have other people view it in that.
Brenda, does your chapter oh, I'm echoing. Do you have your own YouTube channel? Where you post your things?
Yes. If you go up to the main VirginiaNativePlantSociety.org, the VNPS.org, go to the chapters, go to New River, and then you can get to our YouTube channel there.
Okay.
So hopefully we'll see everybody else next
Brenda,
month.
This is Mary. Just announce the February meeting.
Yes. The February meeting, I will be the speaker, and it will be about the EDDS project, which is early detection of invasive something or other. But Virginia is starting that, and they're going to be, well, a bunch of other states use it in that, the software in that, but Virginia is going to be using it to detect, I think it's 20 different invasive species. And they've asked the master naturalist to do some citizen science work on it. But I will also ask people in our chapter here if they'd like to be part of that. This is to collect data on those particular 20 invasive species, how much there is, how far they're spreading, what kind of damage they're doing. And this is to help. There is a state legislation right now, a law where they're gathering information to see if they can either stop or slow down the distribution of invasive plants through the various plant nurseries and that. So we need some data in order to justify that. So this is one way. So I will be showing you how to use the software and report this. Any other questions from anybody? Okay, so hopefully we'll see you next month. And if anybody has any more speakers they'd like to listen to in the fall, or hopefully we could start getting some field trips this spring. It just depends upon with the pandemic, what's going on in that. But we're going to try anyways. So I hope everybody had a good time tonight, and hopefully we'll see you next month then.
Thank you, Brenda. I enjoyed the meeting.
Thank you.
Mhm. You're welcome.
Thank
Mhm.
you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.